So this section is on team and growth stages. By the end, my goal for this is for you to understand how we've seen the different growth ceilings play out from working with hundreds of agencies and talking to many more over the years, so that you can break through these ceilings by making the right hires at the right time and building the right business development processes. First off, why does this matter? And chances are, if you're here, you might be in one of the following modes. These are seasonal and they're also not mutually exclusive, but what we found is that usually the agency is in one of these three sorts of situations. The first is growth mode, looking to grow revenues, perhaps become the leader in your space and expand. The second is security and lifestyle. You might be looking to diversify. You might be looking to sort of push the weight of a gorilla client or a single partner out from under you. You might be looking to just choose your clients instead of the other way around, do great work, open up more time for family and lifestyle and all of that great stuff. And then the third aspiration is transition. You might be actually getting ready to, be acquired in the next few years, which I'll talk about more in a second. You might be thinking about retirement. You may be thinking about a big rebrand or a change of service or value proposition. And in our experience, all three of these things, these aspirations don't happen by accident. They take work and they take being deliberate. And there is one particular metric that carries everything else, all these other three things along with it, where if you are to optimize that and get it really good, it will make all the other stuff happen. It's basically the proverbial lead domino. And that metric is enterprise value. Basically, what would an acquiring party pay for your organization? Now, you might be thinking, hey, I don't have immediate plans to sell. That is way off on the horizon, and there is something to that. You really have to be focusing on the day-to-day and the short and the medium term, as opposed to just getting fixated on like cashing out big. But at the same time, if you're thinking longer term, increasing enterprise value is the thing that makes everything else happen that goes along with running the sort of agency that we would all want to run, whether you want to reach $1 gazillion or cap out at a different point and just have a nice life. So with that in mind, what's the requirement for increasing enterprise value? And this is not just from us. This is from people like David Tobin, who is the head of Tobin Leff, and he's been through probably dozens of, not dozens, hundreds, if not thousands of agency mergers and acquisitions and consulted with many more. Also, this is the same with agencies that we've interviewed on our podcast that have been through successful acquisitions, ones that we've helped them build by getting the sales systems in order and so on. It's always the same thing. And the main thing that's required is sustainability. Are the right people in place? Is the team robust enough? Has the owner been able to successfully graduate out of the sales seat? Is the thing that most concerns us in our wheelhouse of new business and lead generation and outreach. So in this very important realm of biz dev and in the effort of getting owners eventually out of that sales seat, here are the biggest mistakes that we see agencies make. The first is continuing to have a superhuman owner for longer than is necessary. This is an owner that is trying to balance things and bounce back and forth continually between sales and client service. Now, at the beginning, as I'll talk about, sometimes it's hard to avoid this, but we see agencies continue this problem for way too long. The second is what we call the lonely sales islands. We'll get an agency on the line and we'll say, hey, how are you typically handling sales and business development right now? And it's always something to the effect of, well, when there is a CPG lead, I'm the CPG person and the lead goes to me. When we get a referral into tech, because we do a lot of tech work, it goes to my partner, Lisa. And basically, because there is a reactive new business process and there's multiple partners, the agency is over-indexing on the vertical expertise that a given partner has. So there's not really one point person. There's not really one person who owns the function. Everybody's treating sales and business development as a downtime hobby, which means that whenever anything else happens, whenever there is a client fire or some other operational need that needs to get filled, guess what falls on the back burner? The proactive sales activities that grow the agency. So this is really a non-starter. And as you start getting from reactive to proactive, we have to get past this. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a second. The third mistake that we see, which is by far the most common, I would say the most costly, we've made it ourselves in our organization, is the premature sales hire. The reason there's a driver icon is because it's kind of like hiring a driver before you have the car. The fact is, salespeople are really good at, guess what? Selling themselves, especially in interviews. You could go through a whole hiring process, do that right, dot all your I's, cross all your T's, which not everybody does, and still have a situation where somebody that would and could have been successful in an organization that has robust marketing and lead gen systems completely falters in your organization. Usually the way this plays out is the agency hires somebody and then tasks them with way too big of an undertaking. You can have a really good salesperson and they could completely crush it, but when you also say, hey, I want you to go build my demand gen lead gen system on top of also building relationships and closing deals, that becomes a very entrepreneurial role that very few people can do, especially for the compensation and incentives that most agencies are giving them. So the reality is, at least at the beginning of the stages, you can't short the work. The owner has to be involved in building that system and essentially constructing the car or implementing the car so then that driver can be hired. So those are the biggest mistakes. And from here, I want to talk about how we actually see this play out at different stages and where a lot of agencies tend to get stuck. So to frame out these stages a little bit, again, the first thing to know is that these aren't going to just happen organically. It's not like the years are going to turn on and you're going to have more experience with clients and you'll just keep rising through the ranks. The agencies that we see graduate from one stage to another are very deliberate about it. They know it's going to take work. They put people on it. They put investment to it in order to break out through each ceiling to the next level of the temple here. The other thing to mention is that these stages are not necessarily pegged to revenue. They're not necessarily pegged to headcount. They're not pegged to the size of the agency. We have worked with agencies that have been around for multiple decades, some of them even at the 8-figure level that are at like level 2, which I'll get into. And then we've also worked with agencies maybe at the low 7 or even 6-figure level that are at levels 3 and 4 and are highly profitable, have nice lives, do compelling work, and so on. So this is completely unpegged to whatever size you want to be. There's no right or wrong answer. It's completely up to you. The other thing to mention is that at each subsequent stage, what we tend to see is that the level of clarity in the agency tends to rise, right? So at the lower stage, there's probably the most confusion. And then as agencies progress, they get a sharper image of who their best clients are, of where they do the best work, of scale and how they can create more profit through the deliverable and so on and so forth. The first stage that we tend to see at level 1 is the glorified freelancer. This could be one partner, could be multiple that are doing most, if not all, of both fulfillment and sales. Most, if not all, of the new business is reactive. It's coming from referrals, which makes it really tough to grow. Characteristically, there's a lot of chaos and burnout and so on at these stages. But then again, there's nothing necessarily wrong with being a glorified freelancer, just as long as you own it. Like if you really enjoy the work and you can kind of accept that, hey, I'm not building an enterprise here, I'm not really building an asset that I can sell, then that's totally fine. As far as what the team tends to look like at this stage, it is usually an owner or partner, and there could be multiple that are doing just about everything. From a high level, in order to graduate from stage 1 to stage 2, there's a couple different things that need to happen, if not many more. But the first is the owner needs to accept on an identity level, they need to up-level themselves from being a specialist or a tradesperson to actually being a business owner. And that just takes learning a variety of new skills, business development and internal marketing being one of the key ones, I would say. The other thing that needs to happen logistically is that the owner needs to get most, if not all, of fulfillment off of his or her plate so that they can then focus on sales and business development, as opposed to making the mistake I talked about earlier, which is that premature sales hire. Level 2 is the cobbler's children. You've probably heard this expression before, but if not, there's the old idiom, the cobbler's children go without shoes. So these are agencies that sometimes have been around for years. They have a really great track record, but they don't really put themselves first. They're putting their clients first. They're not selling and marketing themselves very well. So most, if not all, the business continues to come from referrals and personal networks. Again, we've worked with agencies sometimes at that 8-figure level that are still in level 2 by their own admission. This probably constitutes more than 50% of all the agencies we encounter or work with. This is the area where it's going to take the most deliberate effort to break through to the next stage. So let's talk about the recommended team at this stage. It's important to talk about team to back up a little bit because it's very tempting to get obsessed with a tactic or software or some sort of process. But like the book Who is really big on, it's really important to start with the who first in terms of who's going to be doing what. So this is our recommended team for those in this cobbler's children position. The people that should be involved in sales and new business is the owner, and not making the mistake of trying to abdicate or step out of this position too early, because chances are there's nobody that's going to be better positioned to build these systems, to implement the car so that the driver can be hired. In addition to that, instead of making that premature sales hire, which can be very expensive and often things aren't there to support them, we've seen agencies be really successful having a part-time sales assistant. Now, this can look like a few different things depending on your situation. It could be somebody that is helping you on the client services or fulfillment side that can devote a handful of hours a week to helping with sales ops. Those tasks might include building the data infrastructure, list building, scheduling, updating CRMs, and just making the whole machine kind of work based on the owner's high-level strategic involvement. It could also be an out-of-house role, somebody that you are working with for a period of time to build these systems and so on. I think one mistake is thinking of this as a VA or as sort of just rote task management. This should be somebody that understands your market or has the capacity to understand your market as well as your value prop, and ideally somebody that you can work with for a long time. Stage 3 is the transitional agency. This is an organization that's typified by getting traction in at least one scalable and reliable new business channel. They might not have it nailed down perfectly yet, but they're starting to see more leads outside of referrals and personal networks and these sort of reactive type lead channels. To back up a little bit, the struggle with relying just on referrals, or one of them, is that you don't really develop baseline numbers because your sample size is so unpredictable and small. So at level 3, the agency is starting to develop their own baseline numbers so that they can say, okay, we get this many leads around this time based on these channels. This is our close rate. This is our sales cycle. And then they can make predictions about the future and decide where to invest their resources. The risk at this stage is really falling back down to level 2. If the agency doesn't keep their foot on the gas and continue to prioritize sales despite all the usual fires and different things that could come up in the fulfillment process, then they risk backsliding. And that's what we tend to see pretty often. So as far as team, the transitional agency has a couple different options. They can either continue to prioritize the owner, and in this case, the owner should really step up to the plate and pretty much be 80%, if not 100% focused on sales and business development. This is the less risky path, is for the owner to continue to lead that process. In addition to getting the earlier help we talked about from a sales or business development assistant, whether that is in-house or out-of-house, to continue to fine-tune these systems and get to a level of more predictability. Alternatively to that, though, if the owner really feels good about it and they have somebody that they really feel confident about and they're willing to stay involved and continue to have oversight over the process, we have seen agencies be successful at this stage by making that weightier biz dev hire. Now, that hire is somebody that needs to be able to make 6 figures through a combination of base plus commission typically. And also, they are on their way to having that car, right? So they might already have leads coming to them through the channel or channels that are working, and the owner and others on the team, that assistant role, are continuing to support this person through systems. They're not just letting them go off on their own. And stage 4 is the enterprise. This is an agency that has achieved systems and scale. They have robust inbound channels as well as outbound. That's really important so that the agency isn't just dependent on one particular software company like a Google or a LinkedIn, but they have the capacity to, hunt for their next piece of business. And also they have very robust baseline numbers. They know the metrics like the back of their hand. They know what their close rates are. They know if they get this many calls, they're going to close that many. And that makes it easier to do everything else, all those other goals we talked about earlier, whether that's growing and dominating, getting acquired, as well as just getting the owner out of the sales seat so that person can do higher leverage stuff or enjoy life. So what that team looks like is that salesperson is fully supported and rocking and rolling and closing deals. They have some support, typically through an assistant or perhaps multiple people on the team. And most importantly of all, they're backed up by robust inbound and outbound systems for teeing up leads and closing deals. This isn't something we invented. You see this with every successful B2B service company past a certain point, is they have this division of duties in order. And back to enterprise value, when these things are in place, the agency becomes much more attractive to a potential buyer, even if the ownership has no intention of selling anytime soon.